My name is Chiara.
Hi, and I'm Sebastian.
And we are both developer advocates at Google. We work a lot on AMP and on AMP by example. And since we write a lot of samples and you are here to learn about how to contribute to the AMP project, we are going to share with you what makes a great AMP sample. So based on our experience, we know that one of the factors that influence what the adoption of an AMP component is having great samples out there.
So let's start with a basic question. So what is a sample? And the way I see it is a sample is a working piece of code illustrating how to use an API. And I think the two important parts of this definition is working. So something that you can like run in a browser and it works, and you can change something and see how perhaps you can play around with it. And the other part is illustrating. So it's something that really shows how to use an API. So it demonstrates best practices and things like that. And in AMP, we kind of have like three different kinds of samples.
So the first type of sample is the one that describes the usage of a single API. So if you think about an AMP component as a single API, here you can see how we are explaining how to use the AMP carousel by a sample. So the point of this type of samples are to provide some code that could be easily copy and paste. So actually, by copying and paste this code, maybe just changing the URL of the images, a developer should be able directly to see the AMP carousel in action. And on AMP by example, we know that those types of samples are the ones that are the most popular by developers.
So and the second kind of example is these are a little bit more complex. So these are more focused on how to solve a specific use case. For example, here we see like how you implement a like button and an AMP. And that's not something that you usually can accomplish with using a single component, but usually you have to combine multiple components. And these samples are really critical because they demonstrate that AMP, it's possible to do things in AMP that go far beyond like the individual behavior of the single components. Instead, it's really like if you combine multiple components, that's really where the magic is happening.
And the third type is the one that demonstrates a complex integration. So here we have a page completely implemented in AMP for a bike shop. So in this bike shop, you can select products, go through different categories, and then sort products by price. So, and for these types of samples, developers may not really be able to just copy and paste your code and put it somewhere else, because there will be obviously a lot of CSS involved or like components interacting with each other. But the value of writing those types of samples together with your AMP contribution is that you can really demonstrate how your new AMP component can be used to build real products in AMP.
So next question is like, where do samples live in the AMP ecosystem? And we are in a lucky situation, I could say. So we have many sites where we have AMP samples. Of course, we have amp.project.org, which is the official AMP homepage. So there we have, this is a place where the official documentation lives. So we have samples there as part of the guides and the reference documentation. But we also happen to have a whole site dedicated to publishing AMP samples, so that's AMP by example. And then finally we have AMP start, which is not really a sample site, but it's more about like offering templates that you can reuse in your own code base. But at the same time, these templates happen also to be really good samples for what's possible with AMP. So the bike shop Chiara showed earlier, that's one of the templates from ampstart.com. Although it's great to have so many sites, it's at the same time probably not the best developer experience, because it means like you might not know about all these different sites. So someone looking at the reference documentation might not know that it's also a good idea to go AMP by example to see more and more examples. So, and we're trying to fix this. And so the good news is that we're currently working on a relaunch of all these 3 sites. So it's going to be called amp.dev. And the idea is to combine all these 3 sites into a single one, and thereby like greatly improving the developer experience. So please stay tuned for updates about this.
Okay, so now that we talked about so what is a sample and where do AMP samples live, we're going to talk about why, together with your AMP contribution, you should create a sample. So the first thing is that by a sample, it will be very easy for our developers to see your component in action. In here, for example, we have the sample for the amp.dev picker. So someone can immediately see how the amp.dev picker allows you to click on a date, go through, swipe throughout months. And that is, I mean, the key of this is that a developer doesn't need to write its own code, but can just learn what a component can do without spending too much before seeing it in action.
So, and the other thing is, which is really important, this is a good chance to inspire users, like show them what's possible with your AMP component. And often it's a case that like using a component a component can be used in different kind of ways. For example, did you know that you can use the AMP live list component, which is meant for live blogs, also to implement a chat application? So so many of these use cases are like quite not straightforward, but it's a good chance to just show off what's possible with your components.
And also a sample make it easy to get started with your new AMP component. So in here we are just showing how to embed Google Maps on your page by using the AMP iframe. And the good thing of this is that a developer could immediately get this working without spending too much time learning about all the attributes for the AMP iframe. So that will make it easy to get started, and it will be a better experience.
So and the final point, it's feedback. So writing a sample is a great way to receive feedback about your own component and its API. So and there are 2 kinds of feedback. So the one is basically, if you write the samples your own, it's basically you're forced to eat your own dog food. And basically this is usually, and this happens to me so often in the past, when I'm using what I've actually created myself, and I'm trying to use in different contexts, I notice so many things that I could improve. And I think this is a really valuable thing to do when you've just created a new API. And the other kind of feedback is the one basically that you receive when someone takes a look at your sample, like when you create a pull request, for example, to AMP by example. So here I'm showing a screenshot that there was one contribution that demonstrated how you can implement the Ken Burns effect for AMP stories. And there was like this weird thing that inside of some of the templates that they were supposed to be animated, so there was a div which had no obvious functionality, but then the div contained the image, and was just like looking. I was like, this feed seems unnecessary. Can we remove it? But actually, it turned out now we couldn't remove it because the runtime somehow required it. But based on this feedback, then basically the developer went back and they changed the runtime to that you actually don't no longer need to have this repetitive in between. So basically, just from this like trivial sample feedback, the whole developer experience got improved.
All right, so now that we hopefully have convinced you how important it is writing samples with your AMP contribution, we are going to talk about how to create samples for AMP. And in the next couple of slides, we are going to focus mostly on AMP by example because it's the easiest way of doing it.
We might be a bit biased. So yeah, I mean, how do you create a sample on AMP by example? So it's just the normal Git way to you create a fork, you clone it to Loki, you run npm install. But then we have a group task you can run to create a new sample. So you provide the name for the sample. In this case, like I want to demo how you can animate GIFs in AMP. And then you define the category, which is simply like selecting or defining the folder inside the source directory where this should be placed. And then that's it. So it's going to create like a template file. You can edit it. And if you want to see what it looks like, just run gulp and you can check it out on localhost. The interesting bit is like how you actually create a sample. And the idea here is to make this as simple as possible for developers. So you simply create a normal AMP HTML file, which should be valid. And then you just like write the code that you want to demonstrate. In this case, I want to demo how you can use JiffyCat to show an animated GIF. So, and then make sure that your sample is working. And the only missing bit is you should explain a little bit what's going on in this sample. And the way this works is you annotate the interesting elements. And this is done by simply adding an HTML comment above the element that is interesting or relevant for the sample, and there you just add some documentation. You can use Markdown to format it, you can add headings or a link in this case, and that's it. And then if you basically, based on this, a whole sample page is created which includes the documentation. You formatted, the formatted documentation, a live preview of the sample, and the matching code snippet, which is easy for developers to copy and paste. So yeah, we hope that this is, or we are quite happy with the way that it works at the moment. And like if you have any feedback or problems, like feel free to ask us either on Slack or on GitHub.
Yeah, so as I said at the start of this talk, we have been writing a lot of samples, and we have identified a set of best practices for doing that. And we've been through a lot of iteration to understand what makes a great sample and what doesn't.
So iteration in this case means like we made all the mistakes and then we're slowly trying to fix them.
But yeah, now that we know those, I'm gonna go through some of these best practices. So the first one is that when you write a sample, try to focus just on one thing. So both your code and the doc that comes with that code should only focus on what you are trying to achieve with this sample. So for example, in this sample, which just show how to implement a combo box in AMP, it's very simple. We are just showing a combo box. So another way we could have done this would have been to create a more complex input form, but that wouldn't make it more complex for users coming from a different scenario to understand how to implement a combo box. So this is also the reason why on AMP by example you will see a lot of really small samples just showing one little thing. And then, when you're ready to write your sample, always follow a clear structure. So start with a goal. So what is that you want to achieve by writing this sample? Then document your setup. So if you're using additional AMP components, explain why. Why do you need that? Then you can just show the basic usage of the component, which is normally like the easiest one. And then each component has a lot of potential. So you can go through a set of advanced usages, for example, showing the different attributes for the component. And then if it's not straightforward to do that, you can add instruction how to test this sample. So I added how we did that. What's the structure for the AMP video sample? So we have the introduction for the sample in which we explain the goal, then we explain the step, we go through the basic usage, and then we added a set of advanced usage scenarios like how to play with AMP video, how the HLS support works, customize media notifications, and so on.
So, and now let's get to like how you actually write good sample code. And this is really important because AMP is a very copy-pastable framework. So, and I think that's a really good thing because based on its component nature, it's really easy for someone to just like copy a few different snippets and build a whole working page just using these few snippets. And we have to help them achieve this when we create samples. So, and what you shouldn't do is like include too much unnecessary markup. And this can be either like too many HTML elements. So in this sample, like we have show an AMP image, but then we have like a wrapper div which like has some additional styling for the image or whatever. And then we also define lots of different CSS style classes. Like here we're using amp.start, and amp.start is using bar CSS, which is like an atomic CSS framework. So it means all the different CSS rules have their own classes, like in this case, like the flex layout or like a margin 1. And even though it's a really good idea to use this approach in production, however, it's a terrible approach for writing a sample, because if someone wants to copy paste this, they then have to sit down and clean up everything. Like they have to remove the unnecessary div, they have to remove the style classes that they don't need, and it just makes it harder to understand and harder to use. And I mean, if they remove this, that's the best case scenario, because we've also seen that people simply just left everything in. So we discovered live pages in production that were using they were using exact copies of our samples from AMP by example, including all these rules from amp.start or bar CSS, without actually using amp.start or bar CSS. So it's really, and I don't blame them, because it was our fault because we made the samples too complicated. So if you do it, like just really focus on the minimum, and this case, just show an image, and it doesn't need to look perfect. It should demonstrate what you want to show. And speaking of CSS, the same is true in general for all the CSS that you use in a code sample. Of course, it's absolutely fine to use CSS, and in many cases you actually need it to show a specific piece of functionality. However, what you shouldn't do is, like in this case, like define a really good-looking button with rounded corners and everything. So this is just too much, because it makes it harder to read the code, and it just like it just so there might be one or two really important bits in here, and it's just gotten a lot harder. So if you somehow have to start it, reduce it to a minimum, maybe like in the button, if it's really important, just like use background color or whatever. But in general, always try to keep things as minimal as possible.
And then when you write your own sample, try to add links to other relevant samples, as this will make it easier for a developer to see more cases, to see the component in action. And together with that, when you use a AMP component, always add the link to the AMP project official documentation website. So I have in here like a sample in which we are writing the documentation for a sample for an image gallery, and we are just saying, okay, you can do this with AMP carousel. The best way to do that will be first of all adding, as I said, the link to the AMP carousel official website. Sorry, the AMP carousel on the AMP documentation official website. And then, since we have, on AMP by example, we have a lot of samples, and we have another one demonstrating a similar thing, how to implement a gallery with an AMP carousel. So then in here, we added a link to this sample as well.
So, but the important thing is, like, you don't have to look through all of AMP by example to find related samples. We are happy to help you with that. Like when you create a PR, it's just like something that you should keep in mind.
And then when we said that together with the code with the sample, you normally have to write a little bit of documentation. But keep in mind that this type of documentation is not about how the component, the AMP component works, but it's actually about how you are using that component in that specific sample, because the best place to write documentation for AMP component is ampproject.org. So here I have like a sample of a documentation for the AMP image sample, in which we are spending time talking about an AMP image should always have a specific, an explicit size and so on. And this is really not, and the sample is not the best place of doing this. So the simplest way would be just to add a link to the official AMP project documentation website for the AMP image. And then once you have your once your sample is ready and you're about to send a PR, test it. Try on different viewport sizes because AMP is responsive, so it should work everywhere. So take a look how your sample looks like on different devices.
So, and, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to recap what we've been through with these best practices. So the first one is that, so when you write your sample, just keep a goal in mind while you're writing it, and follow a clear structure. Then your code should be readable and simple. So imagine that most of the developers will just copy and paste it, so make it easy to understand. And when it comes to the documentation of the sample, that this documentation should enhance the reference documentation without doing any unnecessary duplication.
So yeah, in general, like what we've seen, that samples are critically important for the success of AMP, because like they demonstrate what's possible with AMP. They give developers opportunity to play around with the component, to experience what's possible with it. And and it's a fantastic way for developers to get started. And this is like pretty unique to AMP because of its, like, you can't write your own JavaScript, so it's actually really easy to simply copy and paste components and use this then to build bigger and greater experiences. So in general, like, if you're curious and you want to start contributing examples, please go to GitHub on to the AMP by Example project. There in the README, we have lots of documentation how it works, how you can create samples, and if you have any questions, like, feel free to contact me or Chiara on the AMP Slack or on GitHub. Thanks.